Without the microphone, I hope. So, welcome, I'm John Bowen. I have the Solaris synthesizer to present today. It's a all digital synth, so it's kind of a fish out of water with all the other gear there next door. But just a quick background, I started way back in '73 with Bob Moog doing presentations for Moog. And then I went to Sequential Circuits. We did the Prophet 5 among other things. Many other products. I was responsible for the user interface and all the presets, all the factory patterns and all that kind of stuff for all of the Sequential Circuits gear. And then we got bought by Yamaha, and they did nothing with us for a year. And then we got traded to Korg, where I was in charge of the Wave Station product line, and then started participating in something called the Oasis PCI card. And at that point, I was exposed to the digital side of things, working on a computer with a PCI card. So a company came along from Germany named Creamware, and they had a similar but more elegant looking package called the Scope System. So I jumped ship from Korg at that point in 1998 and joined Creamware and started making plugins for them. And that's what I had been doing until about 4 years ago when Creamware went through a couple of bankruptcies, let's call them. And there were still a couple of guys there that I always wanted to work with. So about 2006, actually, we had an option from the German government. They were going to fund technology companies. So we had this idea, we'll come out with something. And I wasn't sure exactly what it was going to be because of the Prophet 5 background that I was associated with for so long. I thought, well, I'll remake that into something brand new. But it kind of became more interesting to do something brand new instead of retrace the old steps. So the issue was having started with old analog and the old school layouts of knobs and parameters and logical areas and everything, but getting into the digital world with plugins and finding that, wow, there's all kinds of freedom designing on software. I could put thousands of functions in. Which I did. Those in the music business know there's something called feature creep. And you're always adding, you're always like, I'd finish a plugin and it's done. I can't think of any more stuff I'd want in there. And, you work on it for 6 months and then you take about a 6-month break, and then either customers will ask for more stuff or you're out, walking along, it'd be nice to do that. So this plugin, it started as a plugin, grew and grew and grew, but I had laid it out thinking maybe someday I'll put it back in a hardware version. Because how can you handle all those parameters and still make it somewhat easy to use? So got this thing started, and the design was to use multiple screens, not unlike the Oberheim expander, but actually that wasn't in my mind at the time, but everyone says, oh, it looks like an Oberheim expander. And anyway, just as a way to access parameters more quickly. So each of the 5 text screens are set up to handle the basic building blocks. So there's oscillators in the upper left, LFOs in the lower left, there's a mixer in the middle, and there's filters and VCAs on the right, and envelope generators. So your basic sound building blocks. And everything else gets dumped on the center screen, which is a graphics display. So that was the way to handle lots of parameters without having too many pages. There's still pages to get through. And then the other thing, because of the quirky nature of analog circuitry, which is often a blessing in the sound department, because you're always looking for interesting things that are unusual, right? But the instability and the unpredictability in some respects maybe you don't want. But in any case, the people I was working with were doing all DSP-based synths with Creamware. So we used a team that was the same team that did all the algorithms, but everything is redesigned for 2010 versions. So what I've got here is that it's all digitally based. There's models of oscillators, there's models of filters, but basically everything is set up that it can be routed to anything else. So any of the control signals, any of the low low frequency or high frequency. Anything can be routed to anything else. So instead of me rambling on, I'll play a couple of different things and I'll shout out what we're listening to from here. This was one of the patches I liked on the Prophet 5 that was fun to do because it just had the LFO tracking the keyboard. So it's faster down there and slower down here. That was one of the ones I went for. And indeed, one of the types of the oscillators is a Prophet 5 type. Now on the Prophet 5 you have 3 switches, one for saw, one for pulse, and one for triangle. And most of the synths out nowadays have a single wave shape available. You just pick one. And we have that as well. We have something called a multi-mode oscillator, which generates a single wave shape. But there is a Curtis, what I call it CEM for Curtis Electro Music, and that you can have all 3 or 2. You can have the same kind of combination flexibility we do with the Prophet 5. So we got models that cover that stuff. We have models that cover the Waldorf wavetables. I actually got Waldorf's permission to use the first 64 wavetables from the microwave, I believe it is. Here's an example of one of those being swept from an envelope. And we went after the original way that the wavetables were scanned. There's a couple of different ways you can do it. You can scan through the table and disregard the zero crossings, and you have an abrupt transition, which causes some noise, and they have a way you can smooth it out. Well, we didn't do the smooth one. We kept it rough. And then there's Prophet VS wave shapes. Well, being involved with the Prophet VS and having access to the original wave shapes, ported those in here as well. And then there's a Mini-Moog. Creamware is known for its Mini-Max, which is a Mini-Moog emulation, so we put those wave shapes in here as well. And then there's a sample playback. Let me load some samples here. Everything's done on a compact flash card, so there's no preset memory within the machine. It's all on a compact flash card. You can have 128 banks. Each bank can have 128 programs. And likewise for samples. So you can load in samples, and the thing about that that's more interesting than a standard Rompler playback device is that you have full frequency modulation at full audio rate, so you can really muck about. So, for example, this is a glockenspiel sample, and if I use it to modulate itself, let's take oscillator 1 modulating itself, and the list is a big list. Of course, you can modulate it from one of the other oscillators. So let's say we pick this guy to be a sine wave. Triangle. Sine wave. Anyway, so my intent with the samples wasn't to do pianos and drums and bass and all that stuff, but more just something you can manipulate sound with, more of a sound designer tool. So we have those oscillator shapes, and in addition to that, there's something called a rotor. And the rotor was a Creamware module. It's like a little wave sequence. You have 4 inputs, and it plays 1, 2, 3, 4 repeatedly. At low frequency rates, you have something like this, where I put 4 oscillators in, each tuned. One's the fundamental 5th octave and 2 octaves. So you'll hear, and then I can take the crossfade off, so we'll hear a more more abrupt change. And of course we can speed that up. And even go into audio rates. Now you're scanning the 4 inputs so quickly that you're actually creating a new timbre based on the input timbres and the frequencies of the 4 inputs. So it's a little different. And here everything's in tune with each other, but if I were to change one of the oscillator's tunings, here I change the timbre of the overall thing. So, but the rotor's setting the basic frequency for the oscillator in this case. It's not really an oscillator; it's it's a processor. But I put it in the oscillator section because it can track the keyboard and be used like an oscillator in that case. So that's one aspect of the rotor. Let me show you something else that I like to use it for. It's whoops. Here's a thing where I've set up the 4 oscillators with a joystick this time. And if I wanted to do a rock guitar kind of guy and I wanted to be able to have feedback control, you could do that. But to kind of make the manipulation easier, well, for the production models, we've moved this closer to the wheels, which was one thing. But I can also use the rotor to do it for me. So here's those same 4. And as I push down on the keyboard, I increase the motion of the rotor, so I can control it and bear down when I want it to advance to the next stage. So it's another way of using the rotor. It's a little different. So other than that, let's see. Oh yeah. Well, as I said, recursive feedback is possible on anything. Of course, I go back to the Moog days where we took the output of the mini Moog and plugged it back into itself and created a feedback loop. And this generates kind of like a reverse harmonic series when you really goose it, really turn it up. So it's kind of interesting. But on most of the digital systems that have been on the market, you haven't been able to do recursive feedback without some issues. So we're running everything at 96 kilohertz, and we allow any redundancy, any feedback path. So here I've taken the output of the VCA, put it back in the mixer, and you can hear it. I'll turn it up gradually here. So without the feedback, but as I turn it up, you hear that it starts to burst forth from its normal range and give us that distortion. And you can control that. You'd have to kind of limit that with either by putting up the resonance a little bit, or opening the filter, or a couple of different ways, or just controlling the gain. There's all sorts of ways you can do that, and those are all available here in the system. The mixers, each level can be modulated, or you can modulate the cutoff, or you can modulate the VCA level, the resonance, to control that. Other than that, let's see. Mentioned the Prophet VS. There's a two-dimensional controller, of course, but there's also an envelope that's a two-dimensional envelope. That's so we can emulate the VS stuff, because you need both directions. And again, all of that's available in the modulation list. So how are we doing for today? Is that my signal? I'm done? No. Other than that, there's plentiful envelope generators, 6 DADSRs, there's a looping envelope, there's 5 LFOs, there's 4 lag processors or slew processors, there's a 4-layer sequencer, there's an arpeggiator, and on and on. 4 key tables. Everything's on the 4s. The Japanese aren't real happy with that, I guess, because 4 means, you know, it's the word chi, which is death, right? Anyway, do you have any questions? Any questions? Should we play some more sounds, or are we done?
What do we got? We still have, like, you have 3 minutes. I mean, geez.
3 minutes?
Not quite,
Okay, well.
No, we're just getting ready for the next thing. Is all.
Let's see here. Well, okay. Because we have 4 filters and 4 mixers and 4 VCAs, we can have 4 different parts going on that can each sound relatively different. So here's an example of 3 parts. The first one is doing a wavetable sweep. The second one is doing that. The third one is doing this. A high pass with a little trill going back and forth. So all 3 of these together. And indeed, for every preset, you could just switch these things on and off, just kind of see what's going on. Sometimes the programmers have an intention, sometimes they don't. But every patch has the potential of having actually 4 different structures going on. Is that it? That's it.